Now, so we'll probably get going. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Smashing the Silo, which is the first M&H Summer Series event. Just a little bit of housekeeping to start with. I can see everyone here so far is already on mute, so thank you very much. But if you just stay on mute throughout the session, and any questions you've got, if you just pop them in the chat, if you just state your name and the organisation you work for, I think Richard's going to sort of field any questions you've got. But without further ado, I'll hand over to, we've got Richard Hall, Kate Harland and Mari Fullwood from West Cheshire Museums. And I think we're just ready to get going. So if I hand over to you now, Richard, that'd be perfect.
Thank you very much. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is hand over to Kate. Kate, are you there? Kate Harland.
I am here.
She is there. Brilliant. Yeah. Well, you'll hear from me a little bit later, but Kate Harland runs the service, so she's going to introduce herself, and then myself and my colleague Mary, we will join in a few seconds' time as well.
Good morning, everybody. Now, hopefully you will be able to see my screen. Could somebody just tell me that you can see that?
We can see that, Kate.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Richard. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining this session, and thanks to Museums and Heritage for inviting us, because it's a real pleasure to be talking to you this morning. My name's Kate Harland, and I'm representing West Cheshire Museums in this session. We know that lots of organisations have been through a process of organisational change through and because of lockdown. So we're not professing to be the know-alls of this, but this is our version events of the last 18 months. As Richard said, we'd really like this to be a conversation. Richard, Mary and I will be discussing the topic, but we urge you to drop questions or observations or comments in the chat, and Richard will pick them up. Just a quick note that as this is a public event, we won't be able to go into too much specific detail about events and scenarios. So before exploring the theme, we'll just introduce ourselves with a bit of personal background. My name's Kate, Kate Harland, and I'm Museums and Heritage Manager at West Cheshire Museums. West Cheshire Museums is 4 sites, and I manage the curatorial, the learning, the heritage and the visitor services teams. I actually qualified in youth work many years ago, youth and community work, but started in museums in 2004 as an education assistant at Stretton Watermill. I soon became a miller after that, and I still do the occasional day of milling just to keep my hand in. I have worked through learning roles and then operational roles, and eventually to the current temporary secondment of Museums and Heritage Manager. So I'll just pass over to Mary now. Would you like to just do a quick background, Mary?
Yeah. So I'm Mary Fullwood. I am Senior Operations Officer for West Cheshire Museums. I look after 3 of the 4 sites. So I'm at the Grosvenor Museum, Chester, Weaver Hall and Lion Saltworks in Northwich. So basically my job is sort of looking after the building ops, visitor services, everything from maintenance and security, staff management, retail, venue hire, etc., etc. I actually started out as a visitor services assistant back in 2013, before becoming team leader for the team, and then being seconded to my current post. Richard?
Right, yes, hello everybody. So I actually work for cultural services, of which museums obviously is a big part, but in cultural services for West Cheshire Council, we also have rural touring, we have arts and events, and we also have a shared archives with our neighbour Cheshire East. I spend quite a lot of my time working across the museums, but also very much importantly internally as well, making partnerships with other directorates as well. So that's me. I think it's back to you now, Kate.
Thank you, Richard. So just a little bit about the service. There are 4 sites, as I mentioned, and the background to this is that prior to 2009, The museums were split between Chester City Council and Cheshire County Council. In 2009, there was a local authority restructure which split the whole of Cheshire down the middle. So now Cheshire West spans from Ellesmere Port in the west to Northwich in the east, and then down to almost to Whitchurch in the south. So it's quite a broad spread. And the museums, we actually gained an extra museum, which was the Lion Salt Works, which is in the top right hand corner there. We gained Salt Works in 2015. They are very, very different, totally unique. So we've got a 14th century water mill in the bottom left hand corner, way out in the sticks. You know, it's a beautiful kind of rural idyll. It feels like you're going back to the 1940s when you go to Stretton. We've got the Grosvenor Museum above that in Chester, which is quite a traditional museum with significant collections of Roman tombstones and silver. We've got a great art collection and also Anglo-Saxon coins, interestingly. And then we've got the Lion Salt Works, which is the only open pan salt production site left in the country. It's a scheduled monument. It's a big site, and it tells the story basically of salt production in Cheshire. Meanwhile, below that, we've got Weaver Hall, which tells the kind of industrial stories of how salt has impacted on Cheshire and the industrial development of Cheshire. So you can see that they're really, really different. And I think perhaps historically, because they were split between Cheshire County Council and Chester City Council, we have inherited, each site has kind of kept with some of those operational systems, particularly to those local authorities. So that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. The geographical spread, it only takes about half an hour to get from Chester to Northwich, but the two towns feel very different, and each has a very proud heritage and strong loyalty to its locality. Just and in terms of staffing and the spread of the sites, we have 26 full-time equivalent staff across all four. 13 full-time equivalents of those are visitor services staff, and obviously most of those roles are part-time visitor services. So when it comes to cross-site working, it's a little bit tricky. So although we try to get people to work across two sites, it doesn't always work for the staff involved just because of the travel. So the other thing to note was that during COVID, the whole service moved to a directorate, and so we now sit with libraries. So it's cultural services, as Richard mentioned, with archives and arts and museums, with cultural services and libraries. So that it fits much better because libraries also understand the issues that we have with part-time staff teams and the issues that we have with listed buildings. So I think Richard and Mary are going to talk a little bit more about their roles and how they have, how operationally they see these buildings working together and the staff within them. Mary, do you want to talk about your changing roles and how you've seen that change?
Yeah, so I started in 2013, as I said, as a visitor services assistant at the Grosvenor Museum in Chester. I had a sort of bit of a rubbishy weekend shift that nobody wanted. That's how I started. And so as far as I was concerned, I was employed by the Grosvenor Museum, and whilst I was aware that other sites existed, it was very separate. I had nothing really to do with Weaver Hall or the watermill at the time. And I think that's quite a common feeling for staff, especially front of house staff. There's this really strong sense of belonging to one site rather than to West Cheshire Museums in general. So in that sense, each site is the silo that we've used in our title here. There was an element of segregation. So from going from my visitor assistant role, I then worked my way up to team leader at the Grosvenor. And then in 2017, I was asked then if I could also be team leader at the Lion Saltworks. And it was all very scary and new, but off I went. So then I was sort of managing the teams across 2 different sites. So prior to going over to the Saltworks, I was very aware that there was this sort of degree of almost like sibling rivalry, but a sort of competitiveness between the sites. Saltworks was new and exciting. They had all the attention, all the funding, all the awards, and there was a bit of a sort of envy, I suppose. But then when I went over to the Saltworks, I found that that feeling was actually mutual, that they had a bit of envy towards the Grosvenor because it was so established and it was the oldest one and had the loudest voice, and a lot of the decisions that were being made centrally were fairly Chester-centric at that point. So it was really interesting to see the different sides. Yeah, but from also my point of view, my viewpoint shifted from coming from a front of house thing into a more managerial role. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you've mentioned there, Mary, is you've mentioned silos, which are obviously in the title. I think, Richard, you were going to ask what we mean by silos.
Yeah.
Actually,
I mean, I think what I'll do is, as part of answering that, I'll just talk a little bit about what I've been doing during the last 16 months or so, which is, as part of my role, I am the only person who works for cultural services. I am the only person who has cultural services in their job title. And what I've been doing is looking for opportunities, ways that not only the museum service can work together more collectively, but also all the different elements of cultural services as well. So webinars such as this, but also lots of other opportunities as well. And also trying to recognise where best practice is and passing that on to colleagues. But in terms of the silos, I have to hold my hands up and say Smashing the Silo was my title. But I think a better title would have been something you said, Kate, in an interview you did for a Manchester magazine called Northern Soul, called Daring to Change. And I think that really sums up what we've been doing before lockdown and during lockdown. So I wonder now, Kate, if you want to refer to the silos, do, but if you want to talk about how we recognise that we needed to change before lockdown, what actually had led up to that and what we started to do. And then we can talk a little bit more detail about how lockdown has kind of helped that process along.
Yeah, so fine. So in terms of silos, when I was growing up in Yorkshire, across the valley, one of the farms put up a grain silo, and it was a huge, great, tall kind of metal tower to hold the grain. It was like a a kind of defensive tower, and it was obviously to hold the grain, but it seemed to prevent movement beyond its structure, and that's kind of what my mental picture of our 4 sites was a little bit like. It was just, each site was working to its own operations. So one of the things was the inconsistent operational systems, which came from the history of the different local authority governance. But the problem with that is because each site was working to its own systems, the staff, the team leaders, couldn't really support each other across sites. So if one site had an issue, had a problem, it would have to go up a level to leadership staff who knew the systems across all 4 sites. So it wasn't really an efficient way of working, because it was sapping that leadership resource into the operational issues. The staffing structure, again, was kind of site-based. Over the past 10 years, we've lost a lot of staff. So as people have left, they haven't been replaced. or when they have been replaced, the roles have been merged. So we've had a lot of kind of cross-learning and curatorial or interpretation roles. And they really lacked clarity, not just for the person in that role, but also for other individuals who just weren't sure of responsibilities and where those responsibilities lay. And the fact that these staff, these kind of office-based staff, were responding to the needs of the silos at which they were based, meant that they were working for the site and not the service. And so again, it was inefficient, and multiple systems just create more work for the same job. Now, the last thing was communication, staff communication. So I know that everybody will know how difficult it is to get all staff together because of visitor services, rotas and part-time roles. It's almost impossible to get a whole team together. We have hub meetings, so sometimes it's a whole, it used to be hub meetings, so there'd be a Chester hub meeting and a Northwich hub meeting, but again, it was very difficult to get all staff involved, and so any information that was coming down was very difficult to get out, but equally, and more importantly, I think it was really difficult to get ideas in if people weren't able to attend the meetings. So people with great ideas would be kind of discussing them with that in the corridors at a particular site, but it wasn't getting into the meeting, and it wasn't being minuted, and it wasn't being carried through and followed up in subsequent meetings. So we were missing out on a lot of opportunities there. So I think the other thing was, for any development work, we were struggling to get staff teams together to get a consistent and a cross-service view on where we wanted to go. So I think that was, it was just difficult to communicate, and we knew we had to do something about it, but until we had a different way of doing it, I was very reluctant to give up on those hub meetings, which were far from effective. Mary, do you want to talk about anything there?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, breaking down the barriers with communications across site or within site even was really hard, and in a sense COVID kind of helped us along to a degree, because certain members of staff across each site were given laptops, and then that kind of opened up the channels for communication across site. It didn't work for everyone, because a lot of it was mainly the office-based staff that got the kit, whereas the front of house staff didn't, so they weren't really part of the conversation. But what I've done in particular is, because I've had the experience of working across well, initially Grosvenor and Northwich, I then worked for a bit of Weaver Hall as well. So because I had the experience of working at 3 sites, I was able to then start introducing things like cross-site visits, so staff could visit each other at different sites and see how their colleagues worked, and basically trying to foster this sense of unity and friendship, that we aren't so different from one another actually, because despite everything we are all trying to achieve the same goal. I've also started to get the team leaders to talk to one another. Again, like, it doesn't sound much, but it's really difficult actually, and having been a team leader, I know what it's like, and I think that helps in my position because they kind of trust me. So I've been able to start encouraging these dialogues to happen across site, so it's a positive move.
Absolutely.
With daring to change very much in mind, which was something that before lockdown was something that was being addressed. Kate, could you just describe a little bit about the process that was involved in doing a period of audience development research that fed into a document called Curating Change, which we were beginning to work on, and then COVID struck?
Sure, yeah. So this slide shows our curating change document. In 2019, we were working with staff teams on audience development with an external consultant who was absolutely fantastic. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to name her. We worked with, I think there were about 15 of us from different teams, different roles, from different museums. And we began to look at audience development, which included things like, crunching the data and coming up with a report, which would then give us some very quick wins, but also some longer term strategies in how we were going to progress and move forward and do our marketing. And so already one of the site silos had begun to shift slightly to the group of people that were involved in the audience development work and the group of people that weren't. And these sessions, I think there were 3-day-long sessions over the course of about 4 or 5 months. It allowed staff to share their passions for each site and understand the other sites. Mari will talk about this next thing in a minute, but one of the things we did was, if your site were a biscuit, what biscuit would it be? And so it was just thinking very much about what, kind of the personality of the site, what we want to be known for, and that obviously helps with all future development and marketing and branding and so on. So through this process of these sessions, we collectively researched and wrote Curating Change, which is reviewed annually by a whole team to celebrate the achievements, but also, most importantly, is to clarify actions for the following year. You won't be able to read all of this at all, but you can see that it's a very visual document. Underneath it sits additional documents like the action plan, the digital marketing strategy, collections documentation, etc. But you can see that basically there are 6 priorities. The first 3 are very outward looking at communities and being welcoming and safe organisations. And then the next 3 are very much about how we do that. So commercial and creative income generation and effective operations and systems. So quite simple, but everything that's in these documents has come from those people that were involved in the audience development sessions. So we very much wanted this document to be a visual document that people would recognise and we could shake about in front of our senior leaders and counsellors. Definitely not a shelf document. So we pretty much finished it by March 2020. It was shared with our leader of the council and she was very pleased with it, and then lockdown happened. So Mary, yeah, you got one.
Can I just put it? No, it was what you were saying about the biscuit personalities. I just need to mention I was on maternity leave at the time when all these audience development discussions were taking place and curating change and everything. And so I came back in June 2020 when COVID was already in full swing, and I came back thinking, right, I better catch up on what I've missed over, the past few months. And I looked into the notes of the audience development discussions where it said something like Weaver Hall is a custard cream, and I just remember thinking, what on earth is this? I have no idea what's going on. Everyone's talking about biscuits, everyone's talking about curating change. What is this? I just didn't know what was happening. And but I mean, I took the time to catch up and find out what was what. And once I got to grips with it, and I was just like, yeah, sure, I understand personalities, branding, it's going to impact our logos in the future, it's going to map out our future for us. Great, I was on board with it. But I did find as well, though, that the people who have been involved in the discussions right from the start are really invested in this. They're so excited for it. Whereas a lot of the largely the front of house team who didn't have the tech and the computers in order to get involved, have found it kind of difficult to adapt to, I think it's fair to say, because they've also had this feeling of not being massively involved and then returning to the workplace and being hit with this brand new thing they've never seen before. So that's been quite a challenge, hasn't it, Kate?
I think certainly. I mean, because when we were doing the sessions, there were a lot of visitor services involved, but that was pre-COVID, and there's a bit of a divide, isn't there? Because during 2020, there were so many visitor services that couldn't work and that we couldn't offer the laptops to. I think those people just felt that things had, you know, that they weren't up to speed with things. So should we move on to
involve? There was just things got in the way.
Yeah, I think mindful of time, this is the slide that most people want to see. It's the learning from implementing, curating change, but also, you know, how we dared to change and be different during lockdown and how we're going to take that learning with us. So yeah, if you could talk us through that, and then if anybody would like to post some questions in the chat, we can spend the next 5-10 minutes looking at those. Is that okay, Kate?
Absolutely, yeah. So in the title of this session, it talks about drastic action, and we were talking about this with one of our colleagues, and she said, drastic action, was I on leave that day? And so I think the point of it is that it was nothing drastic. It wasn't a sudden, right, today we're going to change everything. It was incremental cultural shift and taking a lot of the opportunities that were given by that kind of COVID space. So just with a quick revert to those first few weeks and months of lockdown last March, there was the emergency response, which was you know, the communications and WhatsApp trees to make sure that all staff were getting information. Then there was the laptop rollout, so those staff that could work had the tech to do so. But immediately there was that kind of split between the office-based staff who had the tech and the visitor services team who didn't have the tech. We were obviously doing a lot of digital responses and planning what we're going to be doing to keep in touch with people on the website and social media. And after a little while, somebody said in one of the webinars that it was like doing a big white jigsaw. There was nothing, there was no pegs. Nobody knew what was happening or how to plan. It was. I thought that big white jigsaw was a great phrase. And so we set an arbitrary date for when we thought we might reopen, just to get some kind of peg in the ground. And then we started recovery planning. So that was that first couple of weeks, and then we had a kind of a moment of heads up. And right, okay, we've got over that little bit. And we went back to curating change, and I was thinking, wow, this is going to be, we're going to have to redo this whole thing. But when I went back to it, I was very reassured that the 6 priorities hadn't changed. What had changed was some of the action planning underneath those, and it hadn't actually changed. It had just taken, something had taken precedent over another thing. So we were getting all kinds of opportunities. Might have been through funding or through the fact that we really had a bit of time to focus on digital, and so it gave us the opportunity to progress some of those things that we wouldn't necessarily have had the chance to otherwise. And during that time, I think it was extraordinary how many webinars and conferences there were available, and we were talking to people across the world. We would never have had the opportunity to do that without COVID, and we learned so much from that. One of the things that I remember hearing very early on, and I can't remember who it was that said it, but she said, we'll move at the speed of trust. So that was certainly something that was in my mind from the beginning. So just, ignore all these words. These are really just notes for me. I think drastic action it wasn't drastic action, but had we made some of these changes pre-COVID, that would have been drastic. It would have been quite significant. So one of the things that we've done is review opening times. Certainly at the Grosvenor, we had been feeling that people were tied to the building and weren't able to get out to do outreach. And we certainly knew that, you know, outreach and getting out and about and meeting our local communities was absolutely key to progressing the service in the future.
Right. Okay. If you could just spend a few more seconds on this, because we've got two very interesting questions for you to answer.
Oh, right.
Very conscious of time, and it'd be nice to see your face as well.
Oh, okay.
But when you finish doing the slides, we should hopefully be able to see.
I'll show my face. So there's a technical issue. I just wanted to mention, can I just hand over to Mary for the green section, which is about understanding what experience staff had during COVID when they weren't involved in the day-to-day. I know that Mary has, in terms of you know, making sure that people could come back and be part of the team again.
Yeah, I mean, you know, everyone, like we said, had very different experiences. We had some people who were very much sort of, I'll do anything, just get me involved, give me work, give me something to do. And then we had the people who were sort of almost cowering in the corner going, I don't want to know, just tell me when it's all over. And then we had the people who were, you know, caring for vulnerable people or who were homeschooling and just didn't even have the headspace to deal with work life and home life colliding in this way. So when it came to coming back on site again, we found that there were some people who were just absolutely raring to go and other people who were very anxious about it, understandably. I was a bit of both myself because, well, I mean, with the added thing of being on mat leave, part of me was very eager to get out the house and reclaim my own identity, and another part was just worried, thinking, but everything's so different now. So I kind of shared the experience, I shared the feelings with my staff. So I did it really slowly, you know, identifying who was able to come back first, who felt comfortable coming back, dividing it into sort of staff bubbles and only opening on limited days and hours. And, you know, we also had lots of sort of session briefings beforehand to make sure everyone understood the one-way systems and the, you know, what have you, the new procedures. So it was really important from my point of view that the staff felt comfortable being back in work and dealing with the public, because if the staff weren't happy about it, then that would transfer to the visitors as well.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. I must apologise. I live quite close to Manchester Airport, and for a reason I don't understand, all the planes seem to be coming over my house in the last half hour. We've got two questions, one from Cara and one from Sam, but they're both very similar, and you've already touched on them. It's to do with front of house. So Cara's made a wonderful comment that recordable meetings have actually brought our team of part-time staff together in a way that never would have happened before. How did you keep, how are we going to keep that when people return to their old working patterns? And then Sam is asking a question about how to keep the front of house staff engaged with the change that's been started with curating change. So maybe if we could put those two together, and Mary, you go first, and then Kate, if you could add any observations you want to make to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've been very clear to the staff that that the technology and the Teams meetings are here to stay, and just because we're back on site again, it doesn't mean we'll be doing away with the online meetings, that this is actually part of our new way of working. What we did was Kate and I arranged some welcome back sessions Now we hosted online, and we asked every single person to either attend or to watch the recording. And during those sessions, we talked about everything we've been doing over the past year, all the changes that have been taking place. And it was sort of a call to action, wasn't it, Kate? Trying to get everyone on board.
Are you able to stop sharing your screen, Kate? Sorry, just so that we can see you before we finish.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to make sure there's, fine.
And what we've actually done as well is we've built in the curating change priorities into staff appraisals as well. So when they set their annual objectives on what they want to achieve, it's now almost a requirement to refer back to the curating change document. So it's just kind of built into their daily work.
Yeah, I think I think Mary's frozen slightly.
You're on mute.
Kate, you still there?
Yep. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
But I think building. You're absolutely right. And I think having the tech and the recordings is a really brilliant way for people to be involved, and so they can watch the sessions, they can watch hub meetings whenever they choose. We've built it into the appraisal system, and also the staff objectives need to be feeding into curating change. So where people are fearful of this change, then we're making attempts to approach those people kind of individually and say, listen, we know it's difficult, we know it's hard and a bit scary, so what can we do to make it easier, because you obviously won't be the only one that is finding it difficult. So let's work together and try and make sure that we are all moving forwards, because we don't want people to be left behind. We don't want people to feel that think that they're not involved and they're not valued.
Yeah, because what I find as well is that a lot of people don't necessarily want to speak out in front of everyone, so not in this setting where we're all little boxes on the screen. But I make a point of, I largely work from home now, but I do still go on site. And when I'm on site, people tell me things, they talk to me. So things that they wouldn't broadcast in the public sphere, they will just come and say, do you know what, Mary? I know I should have raised it at the meeting, but I didn't want to cause a fuss. And then they'll tell me things. And that it's just really useful to have that. So yeah, as much as the tech is vital, it's still very, very important to have that personal touch and the face-to-face contact.
Great. Well, what we've tried to do is just give a flavour of our story in the last 18 months, which began with recognizing that we needed to change. And for us, that was daring to change, given the context that we've spoken about. But also, we did need to make serious dents in the silos. They are still standing, I think everybody would agree, but I think they look very different to what they were like 18 months ago. I can't see any more questions in the chat. I don't know, David, Anna, if you want to ask any questions before we finish, but it's been a great opportunity to be able to share our story and to be able to engage with other colleagues. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. One thing I was just wondering, you said obviously that the curating change came about before the pandemic, the actual plan. Have there been any sort of unforeseen benefits or unforeseen consequences of this? Because you say obviously it's been quite a drastic change really for some of the staff. Have there been any sort of things you didn't expect that have come from this?
Well, I think we had digital improvements on the action plan, but certainly having a little bit of time, a little bit of funding, we've been able to make massive progress on that digital stuff. So with some external funding, we're just about to launch a digital learning platform. We've learned so much. I mean, I think you think back 15 months, and the learning has just been extraordinary. And people are now, you know, flying around on virtual screens, doing all kinds of clever stuff that we were really scared of. But I think the pandemic, as they say on radio too, has kind of forced us to face up to things. It's given us a little bit of time, but it's also given us access to all sorts of information. And you know, as I mentioned before, there's webinars and chats that we've had. One thing that I was going to mention is that, particularly through Museums Development Northwest, we've had the opportunity to have kind of mentoring sessions with, you know, maybe 3 or 4 sessions with key external advisors, and I've just found those really helpful. So every 6 weeks, just to have an hour with somebody who says, you know, he's kind of reflecting back. It's just the opportunity to get your head up, look around and think, oh, right, now what's the next stage? And is this block that I'm perceiving, is this actually a real block to change, or is the block somewhere else? So take those opportunities, I would say, because they're really refreshing and very, very helpful. So I think we've come a long way, and it's really useful to do the kind of annual review, obviously, because it just puts you back to where you were 12 months ago. We're certainly beyond the point of critical balance. We just need to keep celebrating the achievements, and we keep our eyes up and keep looking ahead. And yeah, well, it's slow. It's not drastic change, and it's incremental. But you know, in 5 years' time, when we look back to the beginning of curating change, I think we'll be absolutely astonished as to how the team has progressed.
Yeah, and I think, have we smashed the silo? Maybe not smashed, but certainly we've made a damn good start, and we are starting to break down the walls. And yeah, slowly but surely we'll get there.
Seems a very nice way to round off. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Richard. Just a reminder to everyone viewing that thank you for joining us live, but also all these sessions will be uploaded as a recording afterwards, so you can watch them back. And I think at the end of the presentation, Kate, was your email just included there? I think I saw if people did have any questions that they hadn't brought up already.
Oh, sorry. I'll put it in the chat. That's easier.
Yep, that's perfect. And I think I'm going to spend the rest of the day trying to work out what biscuit I am, which will be a lot of fun, hopefully.
Yeah, you need to be careful that it's not what biscuit you like, it's what biscuit you are like.
Yeah, it's a big subtle difference between the two, I can tell.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to be honest with myself there.
Yeah.
That is perfect. Thank you all so much for your time. And as I said, this will be uploaded in the coming days and weeks. And yeah, any questions, let Kate know.